lived really 24/7. It's to be lived 24/7. And so part of this medium is understanding that it's an avenue by which all of us can be engaged on a continual basis outside of the hours that we are here in the church building. So that's the other purpose for that. And then the other thing we want to do tonight before we go into our class is we want to inform you that we have our discovery groups. I'm going to put those up here again, but here is the added addition that you need to be aware. Each group now has a leader and a co-leader to each group, and you need to be aware of that. So the groups that you're assigned in, there are leaders and the co-leaders, two individuals in your group. The purpose of the leader, co-leaders in the group is to assist in the facilitation of engagement as we go about in our discussion groups, and then there will be assignments beyond what we do on Sunday and Wednesday. And so you as your leaders in your group will facilitate a process of continual learning as we go about this process of discovering God's purpose. Another thing, well, I'll mention this in a minute, but here are the leaders real quick in the various groups. Group Braveheart, the leaders are Brother Sands and Sister Joseph will be the two leaders in that group. Brother Sands and Sister Joseph will be the leaders in that group. In the group Determined Disciples, the leaders in that group will be Sister White and Sister Sands will be the leaders in that group. The group Inspiration will be Brother Osborne and Sister Neal will be the leaders in the group Inspiration. And then in the next group, More Than Conquerors, you will have Brother Rangel and Sister Spears. They will be your leaders. Brother Rangel and Sister Spears will be your leaders in that group. The group Breakthrough will be Sister Jackson, and then Brother Joseph will be the leaders in that group. The leaders in that group will be Sister Jackson and Brother Joseph. And then in the group Gold Diggers, we will have Sister Sherry Miller and then Sister Kim Osborne. They will be the leaders in that group. Okay? So I want each person to be sure to identify the group that you're in and then those who are leaders in your group. Now, here is what our groups will begin to do beginning this week. Okay? Each group will be set up in a group text just among your own group, the members of your group. One of the things that the groups will be tasked with is that we are encouraging each group and each individual to make a commitment to pray for one another every day in your groups. So one of the things that you'll do as a group member, one of the expectations is those that are in your group that you make a commitment to pray for each other. Okay? And then in addition to that, the other thing that we are encouraging each group as we go about the process is, again, this is it's going to be a study group. So some of the things that we will be engaged in, you will, I think, find it very meaningful and significant to continue your study on subjects that we begin to engage in from a weekly basis. And you're going to see that kind of begin tonight. The importance, it's impossible for us in 45 minutes, whether it be Sunday morning or Wednesday night, to actually start a study and then completely exhaust that within the time frame that we have. Okay? So this will allow for further study. Now, that being said, tonight what we want to do, we want to progressively move on. We had to kind of pace things deliberately at first until we got these platforms in place. But now we will actually be expediting our study now that those factors are taking place. Now we begin our study in chapter 1, which deals with defining what God's purpose is. We've been studying what God's purpose is. We've learned that God's purpose, do I have to put up the slide or do we already know? God's purpose as defined by the Bible, and then in the author in the book is defined as what? What is God's purpose? What does that mean? It's all right to speak up. God's original intent and what? End result. God's original intent and end result. What God originally intended for a thing, and then the end result is what purpose is. God's original intent and then his end result. We learned that when you study the creation story, the process of God bringing everything into existence followed this pattern. God would say a thing, he would see a thing, and then that thing would be so. And when God's original intent and end result came together, God would end his declaration of his purpose being fulfilled by saying, and he saw it and it was good. Everything about God's purpose ends in the result of it should be being said that it is good. Now, so God's original intent, his end result equals purpose. God said it, he saw it, and then it was so, and it was good. We're going to learn from our new self, our real identity, that there is a process of living a purpose-fulfilled life, and it will have to do with our understanding what creation, formation, and then manifestation is all about. We're going to talk about that more actually in chapter 2. But I want to put it out there now for us to think about as we see it. Then we began to explore a metaphor regarding to help us understand God's purpose and how it's fulfilled. And then to help identify when God's purpose is not being fulfilled. So we're using the metaphor of the eagle and the chicken. Eagle representing what God's original intent is and was for us when he originally created man. And God originally created man. He created man according to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. He created man how? In his image, not only in his image, but also in his what? Likeness. He created man not only in his image, but he also created us in his likeness. And when we operate from that perspective, God uses another metaphor describing what that's like in Isaiah. In terms of the eagle. Okay, so the eagle is representative of God's original intent, symbolic of what our lives should resemble. But then their contrast to that is, we talked about the life of a chicken. The life of a chicken compared to the life of an eagle, we learned in that metaphor that the eagle found himself in the living conditions of a chicken when actually he was created in the image of an eagle, but found himself living the life of a chicken. And we're going to be making comparison and contrast with that metaphor because it's really such a magnificent metaphor in terms of what happens a lot even with Christians, not understanding who they really are, living a life, a fallen life, even though they may have obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, but still finding themselves living as if though they are beneath that which God originally intended for them to live. And so we studied that, and we won't build upon that too much tonight because we want to go to another step. But I want us to remember every time we make reference to these comparisons of the eagle and the chicken, to always be thinking what we are really making reference to is living a life of our new self-love compared to living a life of our old self. Whenever you think about about living the life, when we're talking about the eagle, we're always making reference to that of our new self-love. And whenever we're making reference to the chicken, we're always making reference to living the life of the old self. And we talked about Sunday. It's also important for us to know, when we talk about purpose, as it relates to understanding our true identity or new self-love, when God created us in the beginning, our spirit person, when God said, let us make man in our own image and after his own likeness, he created us in spirit before he created us in body. Our spirit person, that's why when you hear scripture like this, even before the foundations of the world began, you and I existed. All through the scripture and all through examples. We use one of the examples with Jeremiah, chapter 1, verse 10. When God came to Jeremiah and he spoke to Jeremiah and he declared unto Jeremiah, Jeremiah, I knew thee before you were created in your mother's womb, and I ordained you to be a prophet unto all the nations. Now, Jeremiah had a problem with understanding or even comprehending that from a chicken mindset. Because like Jeremiah, like most of us, when we think of here is the struggle that we all have. Most of us, when we look at our life, we still have this real struggle with defining our life, not based on what God said in terms of how he created us in spirit before we were born in our bodies. We still compare ourselves from the time that our parents, our mother gave birth, and we wager all of our experiences from that point on up until everything that has occurred into our life. We find our identity, we define everything about ourselves, about God, about others, based on the experiences that we've had in our life from the time that we were born, whatever your birthday is. And then now what we're doing is we're beginning to see, just like Jeremiah, when you go to the Word of God will still speaks to each one of us about our own personal experience, our own personal relationship with God in terms of what he created what he created us to be even before we got here. So we've learned that we are not here to find our purpose, but when we were born with a purpose. And this class is about actually discovering what it is that God has purposed for us before we got here in the land of the living, so to speak. And we illustrated that, and this is my last thought. We illustrated that. I'm hoping everybody, if you weren't in class, the illustration is every manufactured product is already completed before it shows up in your hands to the buyer. Everything is finished before it gets here. And what you need to know about your own life, everything about you, everything God had intended for you is already finished. And your life has been finished before you got started. And the only reason that you ever were born by your mother is the fact that you were finished when you got here. And everything that you need, everything that God intended for you to be able to be equipped with and have, has already been placed within you. But like the chicken, we have been conditioned and we have been living out, acting out, not from the position of understanding who we are, but we've been acting from a fallen state of awareness of who God actually created us to be. And so, just like this phone, there is a certain capacity that you and I may have been functioning with in terms of our walk and in terms of our Christian pursuits. But just like this phone, we mentioned that this has about 400 functions. It has the capacity, before it arrived, it has about 400 functions, but I probably operate maybe 10, 15 functions. But it has the capacity to be operating about 400 of them. What is that saying? Each one of us are nowhere near living to the capacity of what we could be spiritually right now in your life. And the question is, you can, but that choice or decision will be left up to you whether or not you will. Not unlike the eagle and the rebirth. Nothing wrong with the eagles. The eagle had the propensity to live a normal life of about 40 years. But God had instilled within them the capacity of actually going through a process of living another additional 30 years. But in order for that to happen, there was a choice and a decision that had to be made. Are you willing to undergo what it is that would be necessary for you to not, as Jesus said, I came to give you life, but not just life, but I came to give it to you more abundantly. So there will be some who will live life, and they will live a good life. But like if you read chapter 1, there's good, and then there's the right life. And so some of us will actually get to a place where you'll feel very comfortable where you are, and that's totally okay too. But I have a sense, if you're anything like me, just like the eagle in the story, I sense in my spirit and have all for a long time. There's more. I've experienced some great things in my life. I'm talking about in my walk with Christ. But there's still something that tells me that there's more that I haven't experienced. And I'm about one of those persons where I want the more. Okay. Now, that may not be you, but that's okay too. I won't, we still gonna be brothers and sisters, love each other and that kind of thing. But just don't look at me funny as a result of me just wanting more. And when I say more, I'm talking about more of God in my life. There's more of Him that I've yet to experience. Okay? And so that's what He desires for all of us. Now, here's the thing that we want to do tonight. Turn in your books to page number 2. We're going to do a little exercise. We're going to expand further on this idea. Page 2 has to do with God's purpose. It's all good. God's purpose. To live a life of God's purpose is to understand that means it's a life that is all good. It's all good. I'm going to ask that Brother Watson, if he will read for us, beginning on page 2.
God's purpose. God's purpose may be defined as the original intent and end result God had in mind when He created everything in the world. God's original intent and end result for creating the heavens and the earth was to make all things good. Thus, after God finished making all things, He declared, "It's all good." On the first day of creation, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. That's the original intent. And God saw that the light was good, the end result. The combination of what God said and what God saw is purpose. On the second day, when God created the firmament, God said, and God saw, it was good. On the third day, when God created the dry land and vegetation, God said, and God saw, it was good. On the fourth day, when God created the moon and the stars, God said, and God saw, it was good. On the fifth day, when God created the birds and fish, God said, and God saw it was good. On the sixth day, when God created the animals and humans, God said, and God saw it was very good. Thus, on the seventh day, God rested and enjoyed the good from all his labors. One thing is clear about God's purpose: it's all good. God's purpose looks for the good in all things, then uses it, the good, for the glory of God. It is not something we say, do, or discover once and for all. It's an ongoing process of finding good in all things, then using the good for the purpose of God. No matter what happens to us in life, even when evil rears its ugly head, we should always look for good to overcome the presence of evil. Paul explains, "Be not overcome with evil, but rather overcome evil with good." When we love God and obey his calling and purpose, the whole universe will work together for our good. Paul says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose." Another dimension of God's purpose is to look for good in all things and then enjoy the good in them. Paul says, God has given us all things to richly enjoy, that we should do good and be rich in good works. So not only should we look for the good in all things, but we should also enjoy the good in them. Why? Because good is the essence of God's purpose. By finding the good in all things and using it for God's purpose, we fulfill our calling in our daily lives, and he uses us in his purpose.
Amen. Thank you, Brother Watson. What is the essence of God's purpose that we just read? We need to speak up. The essence of God's purpose is that it is all good. The essence of God's purpose is that it is all good. Let's just take a moment to see what we just read. When God created all things, when things came into being, he ended it by saying, and it was good. He said that in regards to everything that he created, with the exception of man. What was the exception that he had when he completed man? Okay, there is something that separates you and I from everything else that God created. And when he created us, when he finished us, he said it is all good. The essence of God's purpose is that it is all good. Now, this is important because, again, all mankind has fallen from a state of where we were from the original purpose of God to where we are now after the fall of God. And our influence of this fallen state is something that God begins to take us through a process in order to restore what he originally created. Now we're talking about man in particular. Now, so how does he do? So why is that important? I want us to look at the second paragraph on page 2. God's purpose looks for the good in what?
All things.
Everybody says all things. God's purpose looks for the good in what?
All things.
In all things. Then the author goes on to write, God's purpose looks for the good in all things. Then it uses the good for the what? Glory of God. Now notice what he goes on to say. It is not something that we say. See, it's one thing to say that God looks for purpose in all things. But it's another thing to understand that it's not something that we say, that we do or discover once and for all, but it's a what? Ongoing process of finding good in all things. And when we go about actually exemplifying, showing good in all things, what is the result of that? What happens when we, as children of God, can find good in all things? God is always glorified. The way that we glorify God is when we are able to live a lifestyle of being able to, irregardless of what happens to you or me in your life or my life, that we can find good in it. Okay? Now, no matter what happens to us in life, notice this, even when evil rears its ugly head, we should always look for the good to overcome the presence of evil. Now, we want to pause right there for our first exercise. Living a life of purpose is understanding and beginning to adapt this paradigm, just like the eagle. That last vignette that we saw about the eagle, what were some of the characteristics of that last vignette? Are you a chicken nugget? Are you a chicken, or are you an eagle, or are you a chicken? The very last one. What does the eagle have the capacity to do? Soar into what? I can't hear you. Huh? Soar above the storm. Not only does it have the capacity to soar above the storm, what an eagle will do is fly into the storm. And in the process of flying into the storm, it has the capacity, and this is what God is really wanting you and me to visualize when he draws this metaphor. There is nothing in your life, or my life, that should be so great to overcome who you are as it relates to how God being created in the image and the likeness of God. But now, the metaphor is so good is that when we begin to be challenged in our lives, you will find yourself either responding in one or two ways. You'll be responding from that of the eagle or that of a chicken. So tonight what we want to do, we're going to look at the Bible verse that helps us see this. And your group leaders will actually, this will be one of these exercises that beyond tonight's class, you will be hearing from your group leaders in regards to carrying on further discussion. God's purpose looks always, when you're living a life of God's purpose, you know you're living a life of God's purpose when you have adopted the habit of always looking for the good in whatever it is that you are having to be challenged with. Notice what James says. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters," this is from the New Living Translation, "when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know," that's something that you know, "that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow, for your endurance is fully, so let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing." How many of you in your life tonight, you came in here and you got some needs? I mean, something you're lacking. What does this verse, how does this verse speak to addressing your need?
That I have to keep going, no matter what challenges or I'm facing right now, or whatever test that I'm going through, I have to keep enduring, I have to keep going, and allowing myself to grow, no matter what the situation or how I feel about it. You know, sometimes you get upset about it, because you can't stop and give up.
All right. You gotta keep going. Someone else. If you had a need tonight, how does this verse speak to your need that you might have, regardless of what the need is?
There's always something to find joy in.
Oh. There is always something to find joy in. That's interesting. According to this verse, what is it that you are to find joy in? In what? Is that what that verse said? Is that what that verse is saying? Now, my life should be full of joy, because I should be the most joyous person in the room, because there's some stuff, there's some troubles. So, is that verse saying that we are to find joy